It's 2013 and the LAPD responds to a panic button which has been triggered at a game studio. Upon arrival, they begin to investigate the cause of the disturbance, only to find themselves confronted by a lone gunman. Guns drawn, they make entry and move to take down this threat, but what they find is not quite what they expected. Standing unfazed by their advance is a life-size model of the Call of Duty character Ghost. While not intentionally, this game studio had recreated a deception method used by militaries around the world to trick their enemies. While many examples exist of fake soldiers, among these fake forces are a wide variety of dummy tanks as well. Stay tuned as we explore the history of the dummy tank. Before we get into the topic of dummy tanks though, I have an important announcement. I have once again partnered with Makeship, and starting today, you can now place your order for the official Cone Fumo. I absolutely love how she turned out, and I think you will too, so make sure you don't miss out on getting yourself one by heading to the link in the description and placing your order today. They will only be available for a limited time, so make sure to do so before the campaign ends and they are gone for good. Enough about marketable plushies though, let's talk about fake tanks. Before we discuss any particular example of dummy tanks, I think it is important to start off by briefly discussing what their purpose is. As is probably fairly obvious, these are used to trick an enemy into believing you either have more tanks, have tanks in positions you don't actually hold, or are even planning an attack somewhere you aren't. This serves to fool the enemy into potentially weakening their own forces by responding to a threat which isn't real. Alternatively, it can strengthen a defense by causing the enemy to believe they do not have the necessary forces to make a breakthrough. Although it is far from a realistic game, this concept can be somewhat shown using the game Ruse, where you can choose to send fake units towards the enemy, causing them to mistakenly divert their units away from your true target. However, deception is only one of the potential uses of these fake tanks, as some are used for training purposes. We'll be mainly focusing on the deception aspect today though, as the topic of training tanks is deserving of a full video of its own. Back to the dummy tanks themselves, these have existed for nearly as long as the tank itself, with various examples in the First World War. These can be created out of pretty much anything you might have lying around. This has included everything from sticks and scrap metal to even using real tanks which are no longer operational. Here we see a diagram showing one design for a fake rhomboid tank made using a bamboo frame and canvas. Though some methods may be more effective at fooling the enemy, from a distance even the most basic dummy tank can fool recon units, causing the enemy to potentially waste bombs or other munitions attempting to destroy them. Similar to the tank itself, these dummy tanks would appear in World War I, but it would not be until World War II when it would see some of the most memorable uses. While the most famous example of dummy tanks is almost certainly those from the Ghost Army used to trick the Germans during the preparations for the Normandy landings, this was in part inspired by another operation by the Allied forces in North Africa. Known as Operation Bertram, this was one of the most extensive acts of deception during the war. The goal of this was to trick Rommel into believing that the attack towards El Alamein would come not from the north, but rather from the south. This was not an easy feat though, as the barren landscape made this sort of deception difficult, as reconnaissance was far easier than in other environments. So how do you plan for an attack in the north whilst simultaneously pretending your attack will come from the south without enemy scouts catching on to your ruse? The answer is deception on a scale which becomes almost comical to look back on. Tanks were disguised as trucks, while trucks were disguised as tanks. Damaged or destroyed vehicles were used to represent operational vehicles, and canvas tents shaped like trucks were used to hide artillery. This act of trickery was done by 2,275 soldiers and involved disguising 5,000 tons of supplies in the north while falsifying 8,000 tons of supplies in the south alongside 4,500 dummy vehicles. They even went so far as to use real tanks to create tracks in the surrounding area and create an entire dummy pipeline that stretched over 20 miles. This operation resulted in success, with the Axis forces being completely fooled and their defenses being bolstered in the south, helping lead to an Allied victory in the battle. Similarly to Operation Bertram, the more famous deception which took place before the Normandy landings involved a completely fictional force and was known as Operation Fortitude. This was actually split into two different operations, with Fortitude North and Fortitude South. Fortitude North was intended to trick the Nazis into believing the Allies were planning an invasion into Norway, whilst Fortitude South was meant to confuse them as to where the landings would occur in Europe once it became clear that an attack was coming. After the landings began, Fortitude South would then further the deception by making the Germans believe that the Normandy landings were in fact a trick to distract from the real attack, causing them to allocate their defending forces to the wrong area. Among the many different methods used to create this fake army were inflatable dummy tanks. Once again, this operation proved successful, tricking the German high command into both failing to further fortify the defenses at Normandy and not reinforcing against the Allied landings as quickly as possible, out of the belief the real invasion was still coming. Uses of dummy tanks extend beyond just specific operations though. We see many examples throughout both world wars created by various combat units. Some of my personal favorites include this ridiculous looking one, which I think is meant to be a T-34, and this one made by the Japanese, which was made out of carved rock on Iwo Jima. It is hard to tell with some of these whether they were made for training or for the purpose of deception, but regardless, there are a wide variety that were created. In some cases, dummy tanks are not even entirely fake, but rather feature dummy barrels and are otherwise operational. This is often done to disguise command vehicles or other specialty designs to prevent them from being targeted. We briefly touched on that as part of my video on the Sherman Firefly, where several methods were used to hide the fact they were equipped with a 17-pounder gun. While not technically true dummy tanks, they further illustrate the reason they are built. Following the Second World War, the usage of dummy tanks would not end, and they have been seen in numerous conflicts up until the modern day. Notable uses of these include their use in the Gulf War on both sides, with examples including the one shown here to represent a British Challenger tank. We also see several created in the Kosovo War, which were reportedly intended to fool NATO bombers, although I think that might be the only thing they might fool. The same can be said for this small wooden tank made by ISIS, which looks more like the tank you would make out of cardboard boxes for your cat than an actual military vehicle. Hamas has also created a slightly more convincing looking dummy tank, but then attempted to claim it was actually their own real tank, despite the photos having giant tires clearly visible underneath the vehicle. So it would seem that just about everywhere that has seen tanks in combat has also seen its share of dummy tanks. In fact, there are even companies that exist today which specialize in the creation of inflatable dummy tanks. Sadly, they don't list their prices, so I have no idea how much I need to save up to buy my own inflatable Shilka to keep my house safe from aircraft. Their use continues today, with many cases in the ongoing war in Ukraine involving dummy weapon systems. On the Ukraine side, pictures have come out showing a variety of fakes, including a mock-up Leopard 2, which can be deployed from the back of a truck. As for the Russians, they appear to have utilized some of the inflatable tanks which they have had in one form or another for at least 10 years. While it is impossible to predict the future, as long as there are wars being fought with tanks, dummy tanks will no doubt appear alongside them. I believe we may even see a resurgence in this strategy in conflicts around the world as yet another tool to combat the threat of drones. Given that some of these dummies, particularly the inflatable variety, can even give off a fake heat signature using space heaters, these could prove quite effective. Alongside camouflage, these dummy tanks could prove vital at not just preventing the losses of tanks to drones or other anti-tank weapons, but also prevent them from being found in the first place. But what do you think? Am I right about my prediction, or did dummy tanks see their peak during World War II? Let me know down in the comments, and let me know what other topics you'd like to see me cover during 2024. One last reminder to get your order in for the Cone Fumo if you don't want to miss out before they are gone for good. Thanks as always for watching, and to my ConelyFans for supporting my content. Best of luck to all of you as you start the new year, and I look forward to seeing you all in the next video.